Hi there. I am so happy you found your way to Starlet Sinister tonight. I know you are here to escape the noise, so here is my promise. Only few short ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, silence. The rest of the video is completely ad-free so you can sleep undisturbed. I've dug deep to bring you fresh stories that you won't find anywhere else. I wanted to bring you something real. If that sounds good to you, a sub would help me a lot. Before you close your eyes, let me know one thing in the comments. What is the weather like outside your window right now? I love imagining where you all are listening from. Now, get comfortable. Let the dark in. Here is story number 1. The rain that night didn't wash anything clean. It just made the darkness heavy. Sitting on the porch felt less like a choice and more like a surrender. The kind of thing you do when sleep refuses to come and the silence inside the house becomes too loud to bear. The air hanging over Alderwick was thick with moisture, carrying that specific metallic scent of the lake when it rises too high against the shore. It was 11:42 p.m. The time matters, though I'm not sure why I keep checking my watch. Maybe because measuring the minutes gives the illusion that I'm still in control of how the night passes. Across the road, the motel looked like a bruise on the landscape. Larchwood Court had been dying for years, its paint peeling in long, sunburned strips that revealed the gray wood underneath. But tonight it looked different. Not abandoned, not empty, just waiting. The trees leaning over the roof were dripping steady, heavy drops onto the shingles. A rhythm that sounded like fingertips tapping against the table, impatient and slow. Only one light was on. Room 4. The yellow glow spilled out through a gap in the curtains, cutting a sharp, sickly triangle across the wet gravel of the parking lot. It wasn't a welcoming light. It was dim and stagnant, the color of old paper. Watching it felt rude, almost invasive, like staring at someone who doesn't know you're there, yet looking away felt impossible. The notebook on my lap was damp. The pages curled slightly at the corners, reacting to the humidity that never really left this part of Maine. My pen hovered over the paper, the ink bleeding a tiny, dark spider web into the fiber while I hesitated. Writing down what I saw had become a strange ritual over the last hour, a way to keep my hands busy so they wouldn't shake. 11:45 p.m. No movement inside. The shadow is gone. Writing it down made it feel smaller, manageable. If it was just data, just a list of times and observations, then it wasn't fear, it was just curiosity. That's what I told myself anyway. It was the same lie I used when I moved here 6 months ago, telling everyone I needed peace and quiet to sort out my life. When really I just wanted a place where no one knew enough about me to ask why I flinched when doors slammed. A car drove past on the main road, tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The sound swelled and faded, leaving the silence deeper than it had been before. The light in room 4 flickered. It wasn't a power surge. The rest of the motel remained dark. This was a deliberate dimming, a slow fade down to almost nothing, followed by a sharp return to brightness. It happened once. Then again, my breath hitched, catching in my chest. A silhouette moved past the window. It was too tall. That was the first thought that drifted through the fog in my brain. Simple and irrational, but immediate. The shape that blocked the light didn't match the proportions of the man I had seen unlocking the office earlier that week. The shadow stretched from the bottom of the sill to the very top of the frame, moving with a fluid, sliding motion that didn't look like walking. It looked like drifting. The pen slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the wooden deck. The sound cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. Freezing in place is an instinct, a leftover survival trick from when we were prey. I sat perfectly still, eyes locked on that yellow triangle, waiting to see if the shadow had heard. The gap in the curtain remained empty. The light steadied. Thoughts of going back inside pushed at the edges of my mind. The rental was warm. The door had a deadbolt. I could close the blinds, turn on the television, and drown out the lake and the rain and the motel. I could pretend that the only reason I was awake was the bad coffee I drank at 4 o'clock, but the pull was there. It's a hard thing to explain to someone who hasn't felt that magnetic, sick feeling in the stomach that draws you toward the very thing that scares you. It's the same impulse that makes you lean over the edge of a cliff just to see how far down it goes. Leaving the safety of the porch felt like stepping off solid ground. My boots made no sound on the wet grass of the lawn. I had learned to walk quietly in this town. It seemed like the polite thing to do in a place that felt half asleep. The air grew colder the closer I got to the road, the temperature dropping in a sudden, unnatural pocket that smelled of deep mud and decaying leaves. Crossing the asphalt felt exposing. The streetlights were spaced too far apart, leaving long stretches of darkness that felt thick enough to touch. I kept my eyes on room 4, watching for that shadow to return, half hoping it would just so I would know where it was. Nothing moved. The gravel of the motel parking lot crunched softly under my weight, a gritty, uncomfortable sound that seemed to echo against the line of dark doors. Standing there, the building felt massive. It loomed over me, the roofline jagged against the gray night sky. Water dripped from the eaves. Plink, plink, plink. I shouldn't be here. The thought was clear, sharp, and entirely useless. My feet were already moving toward the light. Up close, the motel smelled of mildew and cheap soap, a scent that triggered a sudden, vivid memory of childhood vacations that went wrong rainy days, trapped in small rooms, arguments heard through thin walls. Larchwood Court held that same feeling of trapped unhappiness, soaked into the wood itself. The window of room 4 was dirty. Grime coated the corners of the glass, blurring the view. I stopped a few feet away, standing in the shadow of a large oak tree that grew uncomfortably close to the foundation. From here, I could hear the hum of the light bulb inside. It was a low, angry buzz, like a large insect trapped in a jar. And then, another sound. It came from beneath the floorboards. A wet, heavy sliding sound. Slap, drag, slap, drag. It sounded like a wet towel being pulled across concrete. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt too big for my chest. I pressed myself tighter against the rough bark of the oak tree, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The dragging stopped. Silence rushed back in, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy. Watching. The door to room 4 was not closed. I hadn't noticed it from the road. The angle had hidden it, but from here, standing in the mud, I could see that the door was cracked open about 2 inches. The latch wasn't engaged. A thin sliver of that sickly yellow light escaped through the crack, illuminating the rain-slicked concrete of the walkway. A voice in my head, the sensible, terrified voice that sounded like my mother screamed at me to turn around. "Run," it said. "Go back to the porch. Lock the door. Forget you ever saw this." But my hand was already reaching out. Touching the door frame felt like touching ice. The wood was soaked and cold, vibrating slightly with the hum of the building. I didn't push it open. Not yet. I just stood there, fingers resting on the peeling paint, listening. "Hello?" The word tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop it. It was a whisper, barely loud enough to reach the glass, but in the stillness it sounded like a shout. No answer came, no footsteps, no angry shout from a guest, wondering why a stranger was outside their room. Just the buzz of the lamp, and the smell. It hit me then, drifting out through the crack in the door. It wasn't the smell of mildew anymore. It was the smell of the lake. Not the surface water, fresh and airy, but the bottom. The smell of silt and ancient, waterlogged wood. The smell of things that have been submerged for a very long time. I pushed the door. The hinges didn't creak. They moved smoothly, silently, as if they had been oiled recently. The door swung inward, revealing the room by degrees. First, the carpet. It was a dark industrial pattern, worn flat in the center. Then the bed. The mattress was bare, striped in blue and white. No sheets, no pillows. Then the chair. It was a wooden chair, simple and straight-backed, positioned in the center of the room. It was facing the door, facing me. And it was wet. Dark water dripped from the seat, pooling on the carpet underneath. It wasn't a spray or a splash. It looked as if someone soaking wet had been sitting there seconds ago and had just stood up. I stepped across the threshold. The air inside was freezing. It bit through my jacket, raising goose flesh on my arms. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click, driven by a draft I couldn't feel. I didn't turn to open it. I couldn't look away from the chair. The puddle underneath it was spreading. Dark fingers of water crept outward across the carpet, moving with a speed that didn't look natural. They reached for the legs of the bed, for the baseboards, for my boots. I took a step back, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. The sudden shift in balance made the room spin. On the small bedside table, the lamp flickered again. Beside it sat a book. It was a guest registry, the kind motels used to have decades ago. It lay open. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. It overrides fear, overrides logic. It pulls you toward the things that will hurt you. I walked to the table, keeping a wide berth around the wet chair. The floorboards squelched softly under my weight, sounding like I was walking on a sponge. I looked down at the book. The pages were warped and stained with water damage, the ink bleeding into blue clouds. But the entry on the open page was fresh. The ink was still shiny. There were no names, no dates, just a single sentence, written over and over again, filling every line, cramping into the margins, spiraling off the bottom of the page. The water is warmer down here. The water is warmer down here. The water is warmer down here. My stomach turned over. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. It looked like it had been written by a hand that was shaking violently, or a hand that was freezing cold. A drop of water fell from the ceiling and landed on the page. Splat. It hit the word down, blurring it instantly. I looked up. A damp patch was spreading across the plaster ceiling, right above my head. It was growing as I watched, a dark stain blossoming outward like a bruise. The paint bubbled and peeled, hanging down in wet strips. Another drop fell. Then another drip, drip, drip. The rhythm matched the tapping I had heard from the porch. Panic finally broke through the trance. The air in the room was getting heavier, thicker. It felt like the pressure change before a storm, or the pressure deep underwater. My ears popped. I turned to the door. The handle was wet. Condensation slicked the metal knob, cold and slippery. I grabbed it, twisting hard. It didn't move. It wasn't locked. It felt held. It felt like someone on the other side was gripping the handle just as tight, holding it in place. "Let me out," I whispered. My voice was trembling so bad the words barely formed. I yanked again. The door rattled in the frame, but the knob refused to turn. From behind me, in the center of the room, came a sound. Squelch. It was the sound of a wet foot stepping onto the carpet. I didn't want to turn around. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my forehead against the cold wood of the door. Please, I thought, please just let me wake up. But I wasn't asleep. The cold was too real. The smell of the lake water was filling my lungs, choking me. "You shouldn't have come inside." The voice didn't come from behind me. It came from everywhere. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the water dripping from the ceiling. It sounded wet, gurgling, like words spoken through a mouthful of water. I spun around, back pressed against the door. The room was empty. The chair was empty. But the puddle on the floor had changed. It wasn't just spreading anymore. It was rising. Water was seeping up to the carpet, not just under the chair, but everywhere. It bubbled up like a spring, dark and murky. It covered the toes of my boots. It swirled around the legs of the bed, and in the center of the room, the water was taking shape. It rose up in a column, thick and wavering. It looked like a figure made of liquid glass. It had no face, just a shifting, flowing surface that reflected the yellow light of the lamp. It reached out an arm, a limb made of dripping water. I scrambled sideways, climbing onto the bed to get away from the rising flood. The mattress dipped under my weight, springs groaning. The water figure turned toward me. It didn't walk. It flowed. It moved with a terrifying grace, sliding across the room without a sound. The lamp flickered violently. Buzz, zap, buzz. Dap it went out. Darkness slammed into the room, absolute and heavy. I held my breath. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear the figure moving anymore. But I could hear the water. It was rising faster now. I could hear it lapping against the sides of the bed frame. Slosh, slosh. And I could feel the cold. It radiated from the space right in front of me. Something wet touched my ankle. I kicked out, screaming, my heel connecting with something solid and cold. It felt like hitting a block of ice. I scrambled backward, hitting the headboard. "Why are you afraid?" The gurgling voice whispered right in my ear. "It's quiet down here. It's safe." I fumbled for my pocket, my phone. I needed light. My fingers slipped on the fabric of my jeans. My hands were numb. I finally gripped the phone and pulled it out. I tapped the screen. The light flared on, blindingly bright in the pitch black. I aimed it at the foot of the bed. The room was flooded. The water was a foot deep, black and oily, and standing at the end of the bed, illuminated by the harsh white light of my phone, was me. It wasn't a water monster. It wasn't a ghost. It was me. But it was a version of me that had been in the water for a long time. My skin was gray and bloated. My hair drifted around my head as if suspended in current. My eyes were wide and white, staring blindly. The dead version of me opened its mouth. Water spilled out over its lips. "We've been waiting for you," it said. I didn't scream this time. The scream froze in my throat. The figure lunged. I threw myself off the bed, splashing into the icy water. I scrambled toward the window. The door was blocked. The window was my only chance. The water dragged at my legs, heavy and thick like syrup. I reached the glass. I grabbed the latch. It was rusted shut. I hammered on the glass with my fist. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew the road was empty. "Someone help!" Behind me, the splashing stopped. Silence returned. I pressed my face against the cold glass, looking out at the oak tree, at the rain, at the freedom just inches away. Then I saw a reflection in the window. The figure was standing right behind me. It raised a hand and placed it gently on my shoulder. The touch burned with cold. It soaked through my jacket, through my shirt, into my skin. I stopped fighting. The cold was paralyzing. It spread from my shoulder down to my chest, slowing my heart. "Look," the voice whispered. I looked through the glass, past my own terrified reflection. Across the road, on the porch of my rental house, someone was sitting. It was me. I was sitting on the porch, notebook in my lap, looking at the motel. I watched myself writing. I watched myself shivering in the damp air. I realized then, with a calm that was more terrifying than the panic, that I wasn't the one watching anymore. I was the one being watched. The me on the porch looked up. He looked straight across the road, straight at the window of room 4. He couldn't see me. He could only see the yellow light. But I could see him, and as I watched, the me on the porch stood up. He put the notebook down. He started walking toward the road. He was coming here. He was coming to take my place. The hand on my shoulder tightened. "Time to go," the wet voice said. The floor beneath me gave way. It didn't break, it just dissolved. I sank. I sank through the floor, through the foundation into the earth. But it wasn't earth, it was water. Cold, dark, endless water. I tried to swim, but there was no up or down. There was only the dark. The last thing I saw before the blackness took me completely was the light of room 4 fading above me, looking just like the surface of a lake seen from deep below. And then, nothing. Just the cold and the waiting. The cold wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the sharp, biting freeze of winter air, but a heavy, numbing pressure that seemed to push the air out of my cells and replace it with silt. Sinking felt less like falling and more like being swallowed by something that had been hungry for a very long time. Above me, The rectangle of yellow light from room 4 grew smaller and dimmer, warping as the water distorted it. It looked less like a window and more like a distant star, the only fixed point in a universe of suffocating black. Breathing should have been the first panic. The instinct to inhale, to fight for air, is usually violent. But down here, the urge faded. My lungs didn't burn. They just felt heavy, settled, as if they had accepted that air was something for the people up there. The people who walked on solid ground and didn't know what lived beneath their floorboards. Drifting downward, the darkness began to take shapes. It wasn't empty space. The murky water was filled with echoes of the world above, preserved in the cold gloom. A chair floated past, drifting lazily in the current, its wooden legs bloated and soft. A lamp, cord trailing like a dead vine, bobbed in the silence. These were the lost things, the things people forgot when they checked out, the things the motel kept. My feet touched something soft. The bottom wasn't mud. It was carpet. Silt rose up in a slow gray cloud around my boots as I landed. I was standing in a room, but it was vast, endless. The walls dissolving into the gloom. The water here was still, thick as oil. Walking felt like moving through molasses. Every step required a deliberate, exhausting effort. I pushed through the weight, guided by the faint, wavering light far above. There were others here. They stood in the shadows, just at the edge of visibility. Gray shapes, bloated outlines. They didn't move. They didn't swim. They stood perfectly still, anchored to the bottom by the weight of their own forgotten memories. Some were looking up. Some were looking down at their hands. None of them looked at me. They were the guests who stayed. A realization settled in my chest, colder than the water. I wasn't an explorer finding a secret. I was just the latest arrival. Currents shifted. Above me, the light from the trapdoor, the floor of room 4 suddenly brightened. Something was moving up there. I looked up. Through the layers of dark water, the surface looked like a glass ceiling. I could see the soles of boots stepping onto the floorboards. It was him, the other me, the one from the porch. He had entered the room. A surge of desperate, useless, protective instinct flared up. I needed to warn him. I needed to tell him to run, to turn back, to never touch the guest book. If he stayed, he would end up here, standing in the silt, waiting for the next version to arrive. I pushed off the bottom. Swimming was hard. My clothes were heavy, dragging me down. My coat felt like it was lined with lead. But I kicked, driving myself upward toward the light. Thump. My hand hit the underside of the floorboards. To him, up there, it must have sounded like a dull knock from beneath the earth. A sound to ignore. A sound to blame on the old pipes. I hit it again. Harder. Thump. Thump. From below, I saw his blurry shape freeze. He was listening. Go away. I tried to scream. The sound didn't come out as words. It came out as a gurgle, a disturbance in the water that sent bubbles racing upward. They hit the wood and trapped themselves there, shimmering like silver coins. He didn't run. He leaned closer. I saw his face pressed near the floor, distorted and pale through the wood and water. He was looking for a source. He was looking for a reason. He was doing exactly what I had done. Frustration clawed at my throat. It was a perfect, terrible loop. My warning wasn't scaring him away. It was drawing him in. The very sounds I made to save him were the sounds that were sealing his fate. I stopped hitting the wood, floating there, suspended just inches below the floor of the reality I used to live in. I watched him move. He walked to the table. He picked up the guest book. I knew what he was reading. I knew whose handwriting was on the page. It was mine. The ink was fresh because I had just written it. Or I was writing it now. Or I would write it forever. Time didn't move in a straight line down here. It pooled and circled like water in a drain. He turned toward the center of the room, toward the chair. The chair I was supposed to be sitting in. I looked down. Beneath me in the gloom, a wooden chair sat on the silk carpet. It was empty. It was waiting. A pull, gentle and irresistible, tugged at my ankle. It wasn't a hand this time. It was the current itself, the will of the place. "You have a seat to take," the water whispered. "You have to wait your turn." I didn't want to go back down. I wanted to break through the floor. I wanted to grab his ankle and pull him down so I could climb out. The thought shocked me. It was ugly. It was selfish. And it was exactly what the thing before me had done. The figure that pulled me in. It wasn't a monster. It was just the previous me. Desperate to leave. Trading places with the only person who could take the burden. Myself. I looked at the other me up there. He looked so scared. He looked so tired. If I pulled him in, I could go back to the porch. I could go back to the rental. I could pack my bags and drive away and never look at a lake again. All I had to do was scare him enough to make him fall. I reached up. My fingers brushed the underside of the floorboards. I found a knot in the wood, a weak spot. I pushed. Water began to seep up into the room above. I watched it stain the wood dark. Up there he stepped back. He was terrified. Good, I thought. Be afraid. Fear makes you heavy. Fear makes you sink. I pushed harder. The water flowed faster. I watched the puddle spread around his boots. I watched him scramble onto the bed. I knew his next move. I knew he would try the door. I knew he would try the window. And I knew he would fail. A strange calmness washed over me. The panic was gone. The suffocation was gone. There was only the task, the cycle. I drifted lower, away from the floorboards, positioning myself. I needed to be ready. When he fell, when the floor dissolved and he sank into the dark, I needed to be the one to catch him. I needed to be the one to put my hand on his shoulder and tell him it was time. I floated down to the chair in the silt. I sat. It was comfortable, in a cold, numbing way. It felt like it fit me perfectly. Above, the light flickered. The buzz of the lamp vibrated through the water, a lullaby for the drowned. I watched his boots move frantically on the bed. I watched him pull out his phone. The harsh white light beamed down, cutting through the water, sweeping over me. I looked up into the light. I didn't blink. My eyes felt wide, fixed, unmoving. I opened my mouth. Cold water rushed in, filling the space where words used to be. "We've been waiting for you," I whispered into the dark. The words traveled up as bubbles, popping on the surface. He screamed. I couldn't hear it, but I saw the vibration in the water. Then the floor gave way. It wasn't a crash. It was a silent dissolution. The barrier between his world and mine simply ceased to exist. He fell. Slow motion. Limbs flailing, bubbles erupting around him like diamonds. He looked like a fallen angel casting into the abyss. He sank past me. His eyes met mine. The terror in them was raw, fresh. It was the only warm thing in the ocean. I reached out. My hand, pale and wrinkled from the water, looked like a stranger's hand. I placed it on his shoulder. He stopped fighting. The touch froze him. I leaned close. "Look," I said. I pointed up, past the drifting debris, past the hole in the ceiling of our world. Far above, through the distortions of the water and the night, across the road that rippled like a dream, there was a porch, and on the porch, sitting in a chair with a notebook on his lap, was a man. He was watching the motel. He was watching the light. He was writing something down. The man sinking in front of me stared at the distant figure. I felt his hope break. I felt his understanding shatter him. "He's coming," I told him. "He's curious." The new arrival drifted down, taking his place in the silt, his feet finding the carpet. He stood still. He stopped breathing. He started waiting. I looked back up at the surface. The current tugged at me. The water felt lighter now. The heavy coat didn't feel like lead anymore. I kicked my legs. I rose. Past the sinking furniture, passed the drifting lamp up through the hole in the floor. My head broke the surface. Air. It tasted sharp, painful. It smelled of mildew and rain. I pulled myself up onto the wet carpet of room 4. My clothes were soaked, dripping puddles onto the floor. I coughed, expelling lake water from my lungs, gasping for the thin, dry air of the room. The room was empty. The lamp was buzzing. The yellow light was steady. I stood up. My legs shook. I walked to the door. I opened it. The night air hit my face. The rain had stopped. I walked out onto the walkway. I looked across the road. The porch of the rental house was empty. The chair was empty. The notebook lay on the floor of the deck, abandoned. I walked across the road. My boots crunched on the gravel. I climbed the steps to the porch. I picked up the notebook. The pages were damp. I sat down in the chair. I looked across at the motel, at room 4. The light was on. A shadow moved in the window, a tall, drifting shadow. I uncapped the pen. My hand moved on its own. I didn't look at the paper. I just watched the window. I watched the water rising behind the glass, invisible from here. But I knew it was there. I knew he was waiting. I wrote the time, 2:45 a.m. And then I waited. Because someone always has to watch, and someone always has to stay. And tonight the water feels warmer down there than it does up here. Story number 2. E.B., the town appeared the way a memory does, not all at once, but in pieces that didn't line up. A water tower leaning just a little, a clock on a brick building that no longer told time, leaves moving across the road without any wind to guide them. From the ridge above, the place looked asleep, not ruined, not broken, just left alone for too long, like a room no one goes into anymore because it holds too many old things. Evan stood there longer than planned, hands tucked into the pockets of a thin jacket that smelled faintly of smoke and cold coffee. Night work had taught patience, waiting for things to reveal themselves instead of forcing answers. Back then, autumn always felt like an apology. Trees letting go, light thinning out. Even sound seemed softer, like they didn't want to stay long. This town didn't have a name on the map anymore. It had been there once, printed in small ink, then quietly removed. Evan remembered noticing that detail months earlier while flipping through county records during a slow overnight shift. The town erased without ceremony, no fire, no flood, no reason that fit into a neat box. Curiosity had a way of turning into habit into movement. The road down twisted between trees that had grown wild, branches reaching toward the asphalt as if trying to close it off. Tires rolled over leaves that sounded dry and tired. No birds, no insects, just the engine and the steady tick of cooling metal whenever the car slowed. At the town line, a sign lay on its side, half swallowed by grass. The paint had peeled so badly that only one letter remained. It looked like it could have been anything once. The main street stretched ahead, wide enough for parades that never came. Storefronts stood intact, windows dusty but unbroken. A barber pole inside one shop still held its faded stripes, frozen mid-spin from decades ago. Evan parked near the curb and cut the engine. Silence settled quickly, heavy but not sharp. It felt practiced. Years earlier, before the night shifts, before the paperwork and the quiet guilt of unfinished things. Small towns like this used to feel comforting, places where everyone knew where the light switches were, even in the dark. That feeling didn't come back now. Shoes touched pavement. The sound felt louder than expected, echoing between buildings that seemed to listen. The air smelled like leaves and old wood. Somewhere deeper in town, something clicked. Not mechanical exactly, more like a door settling into place. The job title was investigator, though. Most nights were spent alone, reading reports no one else wanted. That habit followed him here. Details mattered. Placement mattered. What was missing mattered most. Every storefront looked prepared. Chairs pushed in, shelves empty but clean. A diner window displayed menus curled at the edges, prices written in careful ink. Nothing had been smashed, Nothing scavenged. A memory drifted up, unwanted. His mother's house after she moved out, everything packed except the couch. A lamp left plugged in. The sense that someone might return any minute, even though everyone knew they wouldn't. Near the center of town stood a school, 2 stories, red bricks softened by age. The playground equipment remained upright. Chains rested but unbroken. Leaves filled the slide like it was meant to catch them. The swing moved once, just a small shift. Then it stilled again. Evan stopped walking. Autumn had a way of making small movements feel personal. A leaf falling could look like a signal if stared at long enough. That's what he told himself while watching the empty playground, breath slow, shoulders tight. No wind passed through the trees. The swing stayed still. The school doors were unlocked. That felt wrong in a quiet, patient way. The kind of wrong that waited to be noticed. Inside, the air changed. Cooler, dry. Chalk dust still lingered faintly, like the building remembered its purpose even if the world had forgotten. Lockers lined the hall. Doors dented but closed. Names scratched into paint stopped mid-sentence, like whoever wrote them got called away. Footsteps echoed now, softer than expected, absorbed by old tile. Down the hall, a classroom door stood open. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, laying stripes across empty desks. On the blackboard, a date remained written in the corner. October. The year smudged beyond reading. Evan reached up without thinking and wiped at the board with his sleeve. The chalk came away easily. Underneath, faint lines showed where the date had been written again and again, each time erased, each time returned. A sound came from above. Not footsteps, more like weight shifting. The second-floor stairs creaked under careful steps. The railing felt smooth, worn by hands that once belonged there. At the top, a hallway stretched longer than it should have, doors evenly spaced, all closed. One door stood out. A thin strip of light glowed beneath it. That shouldn't have been possible. The town had no power. Records confirmed it. Lines disconnected. Substation dismantled years earlier. Evan remembered checking twice because it felt important. The light didn't flicker. It waited. The door opened inward with a soft complaint. Inside, the room was small. Not a classroom. An office, maybe. A single desk. A chair pulled back as if someone had just stood up. On the desk lay a notebook. The cover was worn. The pages yellowed but intact. No dust settled on it and trailed like another quiet problem. The first page held a name. Not one Evan recognized. Under it, careful handwriting filled the lines. Notes about weather, about attendance, about small arguments that meant everything at the time. Halfway down the page, the writing stopped. The next page continued, but the tone shifted. Shorter lines, uneven spacing, mentions of sounds at night, lights that shouldn't be on, a feeling that the town itself had started waiting for something. Evan closed the notebook slowly. The room felt smaller now. The light beneath the door dimmed, just a little, like it had noticed the attention. Downstairs, something moved again. This time it wasn't subtle. A door closed, not slammed, just finished closing. The school suddenly felt too intact, too ready. Outside, dusk had deepened. Shadows pooled along the street, filling spaces that hadn't been there before. The car sat where it was left, but the road beyond looked different. Narrower, curved in a way Evan didn't remember driving. A sound carried from the far end of town. Bells, maybe. Soft. Out of rhythm. Autumn light faded fast, and with it went the sense of direction. Buildings that had been familiar minutes ago now blended together. The diner looked like the hardware store. The post office felt farther away than it should have been. Memory played tricks sometimes. Fatigue did worse. At the edge of the square stood a church. White paint peeling. Doors open wide. Inside, rows of pews faced an altar bare of everything except a single candle, burning low but steady. No heat came from it. The bell sounded again, closer this time. Not from the church tower, from somewhere beneath the floor, Evan stepped back. The floorboard creaked, long and tired, like it hadn't been asked to carry weight in years. Behind him, the doors closed. The candle flame leaned, then straightened. Silence returned, thicker than before, pressing against ears and chest. The town felt nearer now, like it had leaned in to listen. Outside, night settled fully. Windows across the street glowed, one by one, soft yellow light filling rooms that had been empty moments before. Figures moved behind the glass, not clear enough to count, not close enough to see faces. The bells stopped, somewhere in the dark. Something waited for Evan to decide whether to stay standing or start running, and the town held its breath along with him. The floor felt colder through the soles of his shoes, like the building had been drawing heat away for a long time. Breath came shallow, careful not to make noise that might feel like an invitation. The candle stayed steady, unmoved by fear or air. Behind the closed doors, the town breathed again. Not wind, not voices. More like the soft settling of a house at night, when everyone inside pretends to be asleep. Years earlier, during another autumn, there had been a choice not taken, a call not returned, a train boarded instead of waiting one more day. That old regret surfaced now, small and sharp, carried on the smell of wax and dust. The pews creaked when touched, the sound stretching longer than it should have. Wood remembered weight. The place had learned patience. From beneath the floor, a second sound joined the first, not bells this time. A low scrape, slow and careful, as if something was testing the space before fully arriving. The candle flickered once. Shadows shifted across the walls, rearranging the room into something less familiar. Corners deepened. The altar felt farther away. Evan backed toward the doors, counting steps without looking. The handle didn't turn when touched. Not stuck, just finished doing what it was meant to do. A memory rose up, unhelpful and clear, standing in an empty station years ago, watching the last train leave, thinking there would be another. That sense of being late without knowing for what. The floor beneath the center aisle dipped slightly, wood bending, a sound of pressure easing. From the windows, light changed. The yellow glow outside softened into something warmer, more lived in. Shadows moved closer to the glass, pausing as if listening for permission. The scrape stopped. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty now. It felt occupied. A voice came then, low and close, though no mouth could be seen. It spoke like a neighbor might, tired and familiar, using a name Evan hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. The sound of it landed heavy in the chest. Words formed slowly, each one careful, asking nothing directly. Just reminding, just pointing out how long it had been since anyone stayed. The candle guttered, nearly going out, then steadied again. Light spilled across the floor, revealing faint marks between the boards, lines worn smooth by passing feet, all leading inward. Outside, the figures at the windows turned as one, their outlines blurred, pressed close, waiting for something simple. A step, a nod, a moment of rest. Time slipped. Minutes or hours no longer felt different. The town had all it needed right here. The handle behind him warmed under his palm, not with heat, but with use, like it remembered hands that once belonged there. Breath slowed on its own. The floor stopped creaking. Whatever had been beneath settled, satisfied for now. Somewhere deep in the building, the bells rang once more, not to warn or welcome, but to mark that a space had been filled again, and the town no longer had to wait. Story number 3. By late October, the rain had learned the town better than the people did. It slid down roofs, filled the gutters, and stayed long enough to feel like a neighbor who never knocked. Windows stayed fogged most mornings, and the air smelled like wet leaves and salt. Some nights from that season still return without warning. Not as clear scenes, more like loose moments that drift in when sleep won't settle. Sounds come first, then the feeling follows. Back then, 24 felt older than it was. A small rental sat above a closed bakery on the edge of town, and the heat barely worked. Work hours changed every week, which meant sleep never came on time. Evenings were quiet in a way that pressed on the ears. The street emptied early and most lights went dark by 9. Rain filled the gaps where voices used to be. A habit formed without much thought. After midnight, walks stretched longer than planned. Not for exercise, just to feel the air move again. On one of those nights, the rain fell straight down, steady and soft. Shoes soaked through within minutes, but the cold felt clean. Street lamps blurred into pale circles on the pavement. At the end of the block stood a community archive building. It used to be a church, then a school, and finally a place where records went quiet. Most people forgot it was even there. The building stayed unlocked overnight for volunteers. Old town minutes, shipping logs, weather journals. Someone always needed to scan or label something. Inside, the smell changed fast. Dust, paper, and something faintly metallic settled in the nose. Lights hummed low, never fully bright. That night, the logbook sat open on the desk. Names filled the page in uneven ink. A pen rested across the margin, still warm. The time written above the last entry read 1:10 a.m. That felt wrong. No one else was supposed to be there. Footsteps echoed once, then stopped. The sound came from above, near the old choir loft. Ceilings carried noise in strange ways. A pause followed that felt longer than it was. Breath slowed without being told to. The lights seemed to dim, but they didn't move. Calling out crossed the mind and passed just as fast. The building wasn't dangerous, just old. Still, something about the timing felt off. Stairs creaked with each step upward. Wood bent and complained, familiar sounds learned over months. Nothing answered back. The loft held shelves of boxed photographs, labels peeled at the corners, dates written by hands long gone. A single desk lamp glowed near the window. Someone had been there recently. A chair stood pulled out. A stack of photos lay half-sorted. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Outside, the street lamp flickered, then steadied. Inside, the lamp hummed on. No person appeared. No door closed. The space held still. The photos on top caught attention without reason. They showed the same street, decades apart. Houses changed, trees grew, sidewalks cracked and healed. One photo sat face down. Turning it over felt heavier than expected. The image showed the archive building itself, back when it still had a steeple. Someone stood at the entrance. The face blurred with age. The posture felt careful, almost waiting. A handwritten note ran along the bottom edge. The ink had faded. Light stays on after midnight. That phrase lingered longer than it should have. Notes were usually factual. This one felt personal. From below, the front door creaked. Not opening, just shifting in its frame. Rain pushed harder against the glass. Listening became automatic. The building settled. Pipes clicked. Wood answered the weather. Still, the sense of being joined didn't fade. Time passed in uneven pieces. The clock near the desk read 1:47 a.m. The pen in the log book downstairs hadn't moved. Another photograph slipped free from the stack. This one showed the same doorway at night. The porch light glowed against the dark. A small shape stood just beyond the light's reach. Details were lost in shadow. The note beneath read, "Still warm." The chair beside the desk shifted slightly. Not enough to scrape. The sound echoed too long. Backing away felt careful. Steps retreated toward the stairs. Eyes stayed fixed on the loft. Nothing followed. No footsteps answered. The lamp hummed on. Downstairs, the logbook waited. A new name now filled the page. The handwriting matched the notes. The time beside it read 2:10 a.m. Ink glistened under the light. No pen rested nearby. Leaving became urgent without panic. The door opened easily. Rain rushed in like relief. Outside, the building looked smaller. Windows reflected streetlight and nothing else. The door closed behind. Sleep didn't come that night. The sound of rain felt too close. Morning arrived without rest. Over the next days, the archive pulled attention. Work shifted, schedules changed. Sleep stayed shallow. Returning happened more often than planned. Sometimes the door stayed closed, sometimes light leaked out. The logbook continued filling. That same name appeared nightly, always after midnight. One evening, rain stopped early. The street dried in patches. Clouds hung low and still. The archive stood dark. No light showed through the windows. The door stayed shut. A feeling settled. Not fear. More expectation, like waiting for a sound that hadn't happened yet. At 12:43 a.m., the porch light flicked on. It hadn't been touched. The door opened the hand's width. From inside, the lamp hummed again, steady, patient. That night, the name appeared twice in the logbook. 2 entries, same hand, times only minutes apart. Between them, a single note filled the margin, written smaller than the rest. Still here. Rain returned without warning. Drops tapped the windows unevenly. The building felt awake. Upstairs, the loft light stayed on longer. Shadows shifted along the shelves. Photographs lay scattered. One image rested face up on the desk. It showed the front door, open. The porch light burned bright. In the reflection of the glass, a figure stood inside. Closer now. Waiting. Morning came pale and quiet. The archive door stood locked. But the light inside never went off. By the 4th night, without real rest, days smeared together. Coffee tasted flat. Conversation slid past without staying. The archive stayed closed during daylight hours. Volunteers came and went. No one mentioned the light. As evening settled, the pull returned. Not strong, just steady, like remembering something unfinished. That night, clouds hung low and heavy. Rain fell slow. The street stayed empty. The street stayed empty. The porch light was already on. It glowed before the building came into view. Windows reflected nothing back. Inside, the air felt warmer. Paper smells mixed with something faintly human. The logbook lay open again. 2 new entries waited. Same name. Times close together. A 3rd line had been started but left blank. The pen rested beside it. Ink pooled at the tip. Upstairs, the loft light shone brighter. Shadows stretched across the ceiling. The chair faced the stairs. Photographs covered the desk. Not scattered, but arranged. Each showed the building at night. In every image, the porch light burned. In every image, someone stood just outside it. Each time, closer. The last photo showed the doorway from inside. Rain streaked the glass. A reflection stared back. It looked like someone waiting to be let in, not reaching, just standing there. The lamp flickered once. The pen downstairs scratched softly. A new name was being written. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Slow, careful. They stopped just short of the loft. Breath felt shallow. The air grew still. From below, the logbook page turned. Paper whispered against paper. The pen stopped. Silence settled everywhere at once. Not empty, just full. Like the building was listening. The porch light outside dimmed slightly. Rain slowed, then stopped. Night pressed close. From the stairwell came a voice. Soft, almost familiar. It didn't ask a question. It only said one thing. The light stayed on. The pen downstairs moved again. Ink filled the blank line. The name appeared a 3rd time. The porch light went out. Darkness took its place without sound. The loft lamp remained on. Standing there felt like waiting for permission, or acceptance, or something else. The building didn't feel old anymore. It felt awake and aware. Breath slowed. Time lost its shape. The stairs creaked once. That was when the door downstairs began to open. The door didn't swing open all at once. It moved the way old things do, slow and unsure. Air shifted, warmer than it should have been. From the loft, the stairwell stayed empty. No shape filled it. Still, the sound of movement lingered. Downstairs, the porch light stayed off. Only the loft lamp remained, steady and calm. Shadows gathered where corners met. Standing still felt like a choice being made without words. Feet stayed planted. Breath came shallow, then slower. The stairs creaked again, one step lower this time. Wood pressed and released. No body followed the sound. The logbook rustled downstairs. Pages turned with care, not rushed. Ink scratched softly, deliberate. Listening became everything. Rain had stopped completely. Even the building seemed to wait. A memory surfaced without warning. The first night in the archive, the warmth of the lamp, and the comfort of routine. That comfort felt close again now. Not safe, just familiar. Like returning to a room that hadn't changed. Another step creaked, closer to the bottom, still unseen. The name in the logbook was being written again. Slow strokes, careful spacing. A strange calm settled in the chest. Fear softened into something quieter. Recognition, maybe. The thought arrived gently. The building didn't want silence. It wanted presence. Moving felt easier than standing still. One foot found the stair, then another. Descending happened without hurry. Each step answered back. The loft lamp stayed behind. At the bottom, the desk lamp flicked on by itself. Light spread across the logbook. The page lay open. 3 entries. Same name. Same careful hand. A 4th line waited, empty. The pen rested just above it. Ink shimmered at the tip. The front door stood open now. Rain smell drifted in. Night pressed close but didn't enter. Standing between the door and the desk felt deliberate, like choosing a place in a photograph. The building seemed to lean in. From outside, footsteps paused on the stone steps. Not entering, just waiting. The porch light remained dark. Only the desk lamp lit the room, warm and steady. The pen rolled slightly on the wood, stopped near the blank line, waiting. Breath slowed further, time thinned. The choice felt simple. The pen was picked up. Ink touched paper. The 4th line began to fill. The door creaked once more. The letters formed slowly, careful not to rush. Ink darkened the page with steady pressure. The name settled into place like it belonged there. From outside, the footsteps didn't move closer. They stayed where they were, patient in a way that felt practiced. The desk lamp hummed softly. Warmth pooled around the table. The rest of the room stayed dim. Looking up took effort. The open doorway framed the night. No face appeared in it. The building seemed to relax. Wood stopped creaking. Pipes felt quiet. The pen was set down. Ink glistened, still wet. The 4th entry matched the others. A sound came from the loft. Not steps this time, something like a chair settling back into place. The lamp upstairs flickered once, then steadied. Still on. Outside, the porch light clicked to life. Soft yellow spread across the steps. Rain had begun again without being noticed. A figure stood just beyond the edge of the light. Close enough to feel. Still refusing to step forward, the door stayed open. No invitation spoken. No demand made. Standing there, something shifted. The fear that had carried the night softened. In its place sat a quiet understanding. This wasn't a visit. It wasn't a warning. It was a routine being kept. The figure tilted its head slightly. Not enough to see features. Just enough to acknowledge. The porch light warmed the stone. Rain darkened the edges. The night waited. Inside, the archive felt full now. Not crowded. Occupied. The thought came slow and clear. Someone had to stay awake. Someone had to keep the light. The door began to close on its own. Not shutting out the figure. Just settling into place. Outside, the footsteps retreated a single step. No farther. No closer. Upstairs, the loft lamp finally went dark. The desk lamp stayed on, warm and steady. Time stopped feeling important. Minutes slipped past unnoticed. The logbook lay open, satisfied. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The building breathed. The night continued. Another page turned by itself. A fresh sheet waited underneath. Blank and clean. The pen rested beside it. Ready. The new page stayed blank longer than expected. No hurry pressed against it. The building seemed content to wait. Outside, the figure shifted its weight. Rain slid off shoulders that stayed just out of view. The porch light held steady. Inside, warmth settled deeper into the room. Not heat, more like memory. Something lived in. The pen was lifted again. Ink hovered, unsure. A pause stretched. Writing didn't begin right away. Listening came first. The archive made small sounds, familiar ones. Wood expanded. Paper sighed. The building existed the way it always had. That realization landed softly. Nothing new was happening here. Nothing sudden. This place had always been awake after midnight. Always listening. Always waiting for someone to notice. The pen touched paper again. Letters formed without resistance. Another name joined the others. From outside, the figure stepped fully into the light. Features remained unclear. The posture relaxed. No knock came. No attempt to enter. That wasn't the point. The porch light dimmed slightly, then brightened again. A signal, not an ending. The door stayed closed now. Not locked, just resting where it belonged. Inside, the desk lamp continued to glow. The logbook lay open, breathing quietly. Ink dried at its own pace. The figure outside nodded once. Not goodbye, acknowledgement. Footsteps turned away. Stone steps emptied. Rain filled the space left behind. The porch light clicked off. Darkness returned without weight. The night moved on. Inside, the archive felt complete. Not finished. Just balanced. Sitting there no longer felt temporary. The chair fit better now. The desk felt familiar. Another page waited. It always would. The pen stayed close. Midnight would come again. So would the rain. So would the light. And when it did, someone would be there to keep it on. Story number 4. In the back wing of the old municipal archive, the lights stay low even during the day. Working late suits me because noise feels heavier after sunset. Although my badge says records aid, the job is really about listening to paper breathe. Keeping my jacket on helps with the cold that never leaves the concrete walls. Listening to the hum of the vents, I line up folders the way I always do. Quietly, dust settles again no matter how often I wipe the shelves. When I was younger, I quit things too easily. Leaving people unanswered became a habit that followed me into adulthood. At the time, it felt normal to walk away from calls I didn't want. Near the far corner, a box waited where it shouldn't have been. Sitting low and crooked, the cardboard looked older than the rest. Carefully, I checked the label and found no date at all. Opening it released the smell like cold rain on stone. Inside, loose pages rested without clips or order. Strangely, each page held only one short line. Reading the first made my throat tighten. Written in soft pencil, the words said someone was still waiting. Although no name appeared, the letters leaned the way tired handwriting does. Under the vents, the air changed without warning. Listening closely, I noticed the building had gone very still. Even the ticking wall clock seemed to pause. Turning another page felt like doing something rude. The line mentioned a bench near running water. Quietly, I wondered why that place felt familiar. Although I have never lived near a river, memory follows its own rules. Watching the words blur, I rubbed my eyes and checked the time. The screen on my phone glowed just past midnight. From the hallway, a soft dragging sound moved closer. Listening harder made my shoulders lift. Slowly, I placed the pages back into the box. Before the latch moved fully, the sound faded like breath on glass. Standing still, I waited longer than made sense. Eventually, the door stayed shut, as if nothing had touched it. Inside the archive, the lights hummed again. Listening to that low noise helped my hands stop shaking. Quietly, I told myself old buildings settle and make sounds. Returning to the box felt necessary, not brave. Lifting another page, I noticed faint water stains along the edges. Carefully, I read a line about footsteps stopping behind someone. Although the words stayed simple, they felt close to my skin. Watching the pencil marks deepen near the end, I sensed hesitation. At the time, it felt like reading a pause instead of a sentence. From memory, I recalled nights when I avoided phone calls. Ignoring ringing always felt easier than explaining absence. Now, regret sat heavier than the paper in my hands. Under the desk lamp, a small note slipped free. Resting alone, it listed a time without a date. Quietly, the number matched the clock above the door. When the minute passed, the air cooled again. Listening closely, I heard a faint tap somewhere beyond the shelves. Slowly, my chair scraped as I stood. Between rows, the shadows stretched wrong. Watching them move made my stomach tighten. Although I told myself it was just the lights, the feeling stayed. Near the back exit, a coat hung where none should be. Swaying slightly, the fabric looked damp and dark. Quietly, I avoided touching it. Behind me, the box slid a few inches on its own. Hearing cardboard shift made my breath stop. Slowly, I turned back toward the desk. On top of the pages, a new line had appeared. Written darker than the rest, it asked if I could stay a while longer. Beside the desk, the chair felt colder when I sat back down. Breathing slowly helped the room settle again. Although fear hadn't arrived yet, something heavier had. Across the page, the pencil marks pressed deeper than before. Reading the new line made my chest feel tight. Quietly, it asked why I always left when someone waited. From the vent above, a drop of water fell onto the floor. Listening to it echo, I thought about unfinished goodbyes. At the time, walking away always felt cleaner. Near the shelves, the hanging coat shifted again. Watching it move without wind made my hands curl. Softly, fabric brushed the concrete as if someone passed by. Behind my desk, the box opened wider on its own. Seeing more pages inside felt like being watched by paper eyes. Slowly, another sentence formed with careful patience. Although the words stayed gentle, they asked for company. Holding my breath, I realized the archive was no longer empty. Inside the quiet, someone was still waiting. In the stillness, the page did not move, yet the words felt closer. Breathing shallow, I noticed the vent had stopped humming again. Although the light stayed on, the room felt dimmer. Across the aisle, the coat leaned as if listening. Watching the fabric hold its shape made my jaw ache. Quietly, I understood it wasn't meant to be worn. Under my palm, the paper felt warm for the first time. Touching it sent a slow pulse up my arm. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Between the shelves, a smell of damp earth returned. Listening closely, I heard pages turning without sound. Softly, another line appeared near the margin. Reading it felt like being named without hearing my name. Seeing that question made my stomach drop. Carefully, I answered out loud that I could stay a little. Behind me, the code shifted closer. Standing still seemed safer than moving. Although my legs wanted to run, my feet refused. Near the exit sign, the light flickered once. Watching it steady again felt like permission. Quietly, the box slid nearer to my chair. Inside the paper stack, dates began to blur. Noticing how many lines ended unfinished hurt more than fear. Slowly, regret pressed in like a held breath. From the hallway, footsteps did not arrive. Listening to that absence made my ears ring. When I looked back down, the page was blank again. At the bottom, a final sentence started to form. Waiting for it to finish felt like holding a door open. Although my hand shook, I stayed seated. Across the blank space, the pencil returned without sound. Watching the letters arrive slowly made time feel soft and loose. Quietly, the sentence asked what I was afraid to answer. Under the desk, my foot tapped without permission. Listening to that small noise made me think of waiting rooms. At the time, sitting still was always harder than leaving. Near the shelves, the coat sagged as if tired. Seeing it fold inward felt like watching someone sit down. Although no face appeared, presence filled the room. Between breaths, the archive smelled older than before. Remembering unfinished conversations made my chest feel tight. Softly, I admitted I feared saying the wrong thing. On the page, the writing slowed again. Reading each word felt like listening to someone think. Quietly, it thanked me for not walking away. Behind my chair, the air warmed slightly. Feeling that change made my eyes sting. Although nothing touched me, comfort settled close. Near the clock, the hands stopped moving. Watching time pause did not feel frightening. Instead, it felt like being allowed to rest. Across the desk, more pages turned themselves. Noticing how many lines were written for others made me sad. Slowly, I understood I was not the first to sit here. At the edge of the box, one page slid free. Lying flat, it held only a single word. Reading it felt heavier than a question. Beneath the lamp, the word waited for my response. Holding my breath, I knew what it asked without spelling it. Quietly, I stayed. Beneath the lamp, the page stayed open without moving. Breathing slowed as the room leaned inward. Although I could have stood, the idea no longer mattered. Across the paper, the word deepened in color. Reading it again felt like agreeing without sound. Quietly, my shoulders dropped for the first time in years. Behind the shelves, the coat finally went still. Watching that shape rest felt like a long wait ending. Softly, the archive seemed to exhale with me. Under my hands, the desk felt warmer than before. Touching the grain reminded me of staying when I should have. At the time, leaving always felt safer than being seen. Near the doorway, the exit sign dimmed without turning off. Seeing the room choose shadow felt gentle. Although light remained, it no longer asked anything. Inside the box, the pages lay flat at last. Knowing no more lines would appear brought a strange calm. Quietly, I understood the waiting had shifted. Within the silence, my name never appeared. Accepting that felt like the final answer. Slowly, I stopped thinking about going home. In the back wing of the archive, the night stayed. Listening to paper breathe became my only work. Somewhere between the shelves, I remained. Story number 5. The lights were still on when I arrived, which felt wrong somehow, like a room that hadn't realized it was empty yet. In the far end of the station, beneath the hanging clock, the air smelled old and cold, the kind that sticks to your jacket. Quietly, my boots made a sound I didn't expect, too loud, bouncing off the walls and coming back thinner. Although I had worked nights for years, the station always felt newer after dark, like it reset itself when no one was watching. Frozen in place for a second, I waited to hear something answer me. Slowly, I told myself it was just another shift. The job was simple on paper. In the winter months after the last train left, someone had to stay until morning. The heater stayed on low, the door stayed locked, and the lights stayed half bright, never fully awake. Because I had taken too many sick days the year before, I ended up with this route. Against the glass ticket booths, my reflection followed me, pale and stretched by the curved windows. Quietly, the clock ticked. I always noticed the clock first. In daylight, it was harmless, almost friendly, with its round face and thick black hands. At night, it felt like it was watching the room instead of measuring it. Although the schedule said no trains until dawn, the tracks still hummed faintly, like they remembered their purpose. Hidden by shadows near the platforms, old benches waited in rows, their metal arms cold enough to bite. Slowly, I set my bag down behind the service desk. This wasn't my first night here. Last winter, I had covered a few shifts when someone quit without notice. Even then, something about the place never settled right in me. Because the station sat lower than the street, you had to walk down into it, like stepping into a shallow bowl. In the colder months, the air sank with you and stayed. Quietly, the heaters clicked on and off. At home, I slept with the TV on. Silence made my thoughts wander too far, back to things I should have done differently. Here, silence didn't wander. It stayed. Although I tried not to think about it, my last argument with my sister came back whenever the room went still. Against the far wall, a row of lockers stood half open, doors never quite closing right. Slowly, I checked my watch. Midnight sat there heavier than other hours. The station seemed to know it had crossed the line, even if nothing had changed. The lights buzzed just a little louder. Because the cameras were old, I did a manual walk every hour. In the corner near Platform C, a map of the city peeled away from the wall, curling like dry leaves. Quietly, I passed the restrooms, careful not to look into the darkened mirrors. I had a bad habit of counting things when I was nervous. Steps between pillars, lights overhead, benches per platform. Although the numbers never stayed the same, I kept counting anyway. Slowly, the cold worked its way through my gloves. The station made sounds when it thought no one was listening, metal popping as it cooled, a soft whine from deep inside the walls. Because I had worked factories before, I knew buildings could sound alive without being alive. Still, the pauses between the sounds felt too measured, like someone waiting for a response. Quietly, I stopped walking. From the center platform, the tracks disappeared into black tunnels at both ends. Even with the lights on, the darkness past the platforms felt thick, like fabric. Although I knew better, I stood there longer than I should have. Hidden by the hum of electricity, something else pressed at the edge of hearing. Slowly, I shook my head and moved on. The first strange thing happened, near the ticket machines. Not loud, not sudden. Because I was half distracted, it took me a moment to notice the warmth. Quietly, I placed my hand on the metal casing. The machine felt warm, warmer than it should have been this late. Although it was powered down, the screen glowed faintly. Not on, just aware. Slowly, I pulled my hand back. I wrote it off as a glitch. Old systems did strange things when the temperature dropped. At the time, it felt normal. Because the logbook needed something written, I noted it down and moved on. The rest of the hour passed without trouble. Flights stayed steady. Doors stayed locked. Although I tried to read, the words slid off my mind. Quietly, the clock ticked louder. When I made my second walk, the air felt heavier. Not colder, closer. Because the heaters hadn't changed, I couldn't explain it. Slowly, my breath fogged even though the temperature hadn't dropped. At platform B, one of the benches had shifted. Just a little, enough to notice. Although benches sometimes moved during cleaning, no one had been here since evening. Hidden by the angle of the lights, the scrape marks on the floor looked fresh. Quietly, I stood there listening. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No echo. Because I didn't want to sound foolish, I adjusted the bench back and kept walking. The third hour stretched longer than the rest. My legs felt tired in a way that didn't match the work. Although I checked the doors twice, the lock stayed tight. Slowly, I started humming without realizing it. The tune was something my mother used to play when I was a kid. I hadn't thought about it in years. The sound felt out of place in the wide room. Quietly, I stopped humming. From the far tunnel, something answered. Not a sound exactly, more like the space tightening, as if the station leaned inward. Because my chest felt tight, I sat down at the service desk. The cameras showed empty platforms. Every angle clean, every shadow still. Although relief washed over me, it didn't last. Slowly, one of the screens flickered. Platform C filled the monitor, the image grainy but clear. At the edge of the frame, near the tunnel mouth, the darkness looked wrong. Quietly, I leaned closer. The darkness moved. Not forward. Not back. Because it shifted like something adjusting its weight, my hands went cold. Although I told myself it was a trick of the camera, my mouth went dry. Slowly, the clock ticked louder than ever. I reached for the radio. Static answered. Quietly, I stood up. The station felt smaller now, like the walls had crept in while I was sitting. Even the lights seemed lower. Because my training said to investigate, I grabbed my flashlight. Although every step felt heavier, I moved toward platform C. The tunnel breathed. Not air. Time. Quietly, the hum under the floor deepened. As I reached the edge of the platform, the darkness inside the tunnel shifted again, and something inside it leaned closer, enough that I could feel it watching me, and before I could step back, the lights above me dimmed and the clock stopped ticking, and the cold pressed in from every side as I realized the station was no longer empty, and something had been waiting for the last train to leave so it could finally step out of the dark and reach toward me. In the space between breaths, the light above the platform didn't go out all at once, but softened, like someone turning their head away. Although my feet stayed where they were, my body leaned back without asking me first. Quietly, the tunnel air brushed my face, dry and old, carrying a smell like dust trapped for years. Slowly, my flashlight slipped from my hand. Against the platform edge, it rolled once and stopped, its beam aimed into the dark, where the tracks vanished. Hidden in that beam, the tunnel walls looked closer than before, like they had narrowed. Because my radio only hissed, I didn't bother lifting it again. The darkness didn't rush. It waited. Although my heart wanted to race, it kept a slow beat, heavy and calm in the worst way. Descriptive thoughts drifted through me, not panic, just a dull knowing. Quietly, something inside the tunnel shifted its balance. In the glass of the safety barrier, my reflection no longer matched my movements. The face stared longer than I did, eyes fixed past me, toward the station behind. Because I had always hated mirrors at night, I turned away. The station lights dimmed another step. Although the clock above the platform stayed frozen, the air still moved, pressing gently, like hands on my shoulders. Slowly, the hum under the floor deepened until it felt like it was coming from my chest. Quietly, the benches creaked. Against the far wall, lockers clicked open one by one, metal doors tapping softly as if counting time a different way. Hidden by the low light, the ticket machines glowed faintly again, warmer now. Because my legs felt wrong, heavy and light at the same time, I stayed where I was. The tunnel breathed again, not louder, closer. Although I had worked alone for years, I realized I had never truly been alone anywhere before. This felt different, like the room itself had turned to face me. Slowly, I noticed the floor markings near the edge had faded. Old safety paint worn down by feet that didn't walk anymore. Quietly, the darkness lifted just enough for me to see shape without detail. It wasn't tall, it wasn't wide. It fit the tunnel the way a thought fits a pause. Because my mouth wouldn't form words, I swallowed instead. The station answered that. Although nothing moved fast, everything felt decided. The lights over the exits dimmed further, green signs dull and tired. Slowly, I backed away from the edge. Against the wall, the map curled more, peeling free and sliding down with a dry whisper. Hidden beneath it, older layers of paint showed marks I hadn't seen before, thin lines running toward the platforms. Because my shift log sat open at the desk, I thought of it suddenly, one more thing left unfinished. Quietly, I turned. The station behind me looked longer than it had before. The service desk felt farther away, like the room had stretched. Although I took a step, the floor didn't respond right. My foot landed softer, like stepping on thick carpet instead of tile. Slowly, I understood the sound wasn't silence. It was waiting. The darkness behind me adjusted again. Because I didn't want to see it change, I kept my eyes forward. Quietly, the heaters shut off. Cold crept in, not sharp, just steady, filling space the way fog fills a valley. The smell of old air grew stronger, layered with something else, something dry and patient. Although I reached the desk, the chair wasn't where I remembered it. Slowly, the monitors flickered back on by themselves. Platform C filled the screen again. Against the tunnel mouth, the darkness now reached the painted line, just past where passengers used to wait. Hidden inside it, faint shapes pressed forward, not bodies, more like memories with weight. Because my name sat on the logbook page, written in my own hand, it felt important. Quietly, the pen rolled toward me. I didn't pick it up. Although the station had stopped ticking, time still moved inside me. My breath slowed until each one felt borrowed. Slowly, the darkness reached the edge of the platform in the monitor. The camera didn't glitch this time. Because the glass in front of the screen reflected me again, I saw something standing closer than before, right behind my shoulder, its outline matching the shape of the tunnel like it had always belonged there. Quietly, I stayed still. The station settled. Lights found a new level and held it. Doors stayed locked without effort. Although the cold stayed, it no longer crept. Slowly, I realized the fear wasn't rising anymore. It was done moving. The last thing I noticed was the clock starting again, not ticking forward, but holding the same second, over and over, while the station breathed around me, and the dark behind my reflection leaned in close enough that I didn't need to turn to know I wasn't leaving, not at the end of the shift, not at the end of any shift, just standing here where the station keeps what it needs, when the night is quiet and empty and waiting. Story number 6. In the hours before dawn, when the snow pressed its quiet weight against the windows, the building felt hollow in a way I couldn't explain. Although my shift had started like any other, the air inside the archive room carried a stillness that clung to my clothes. The heaters hummed softly, tired and uneven, and the lights buzzed with a low sound that never quite faded. Quietly, I set my lunch bag beneath the desk and logged my name on the clipboard, the pen skipping once as my hand shook. The handwriting looked wrong, thinner than usual, as if someone else had written it. The county records building sat alone on the edge of town, a low concrete square wrapped in frost. Snowbanks leaned against the outer walls like they were listening. At night, no one passed through unless they worked here, and I had worked here long enough to know every sound it made. Because I handled overnight security, the silence was usually my friend. Cameras blinked, doors stayed shut. Time moved slow and predictable, the way I liked it. Still, that morning something felt off. Behind the glass wall, the archive shelves stood in neat rows, boxes stacked and labeled with careful black ink. Births, deaths, property lines, old permits, lives reduced to paper and dates. Against the far wall, a single filing cabinet sat apart from the others. It wasn't listed on my route, and it never showed up on inventory sheets. I told myself it had always been there. Slowly, I walked past it without stopping. The snow outside thickened, the world turning pale and soft. Streetlights blurred, their glow dulled by ice. Somewhere in the building, a pipe knocked once, then settled. Although I tried to focus on my routine, my eyes kept drifting back to that cabinet. The metal was darker than the rest, older somehow, its surface scratched in uneven lines. A strip of masking tape clung to the top drawer, yellowed with age. Written on it, in faded pen, was a name, not one I recognized at first. Against my better judgment, I stopped in front of it. The floor beneath my boots felt colder there, the concrete pulling the heat from my soles. Carefully, I touched the handle. The metal burned with cold. Quietly, the drawer slid open. Inside were photographs. Not files, not folders, just stacks of loose prints, edges curled, corners soft with handling. Each one showed the same house, taken from different angles and distances. A narrow home on a snow-lined street. Wooden steps, a sagging porch rail. Windows that reflected the sky like dull eyes. Although the pictures looked old, the snow in them looked fresh. Identical almost, as if taken on the same day over and over. Slowly, I lifted the top photo. In the corner of the frame, barely visible near the porch steps, stood a figure. He faced the house, his back to the camera, shoulders hunched inside a dark coat. Snow dusted his hair, clinging to him as if he'd been standing there a long time. My throat tightened. The coat looked familiar, not in a clear way, just enough to make my chest ache. Because my shift rules were simple, I should have closed the drawer and reported the cabinet. That's what the handbook said. That's what the supervisor would expect. Instead, I kept looking. Another photo, same house, same porch. This time, the figure stood closer to the door. Frozen in place, I noticed the timestamp printed along the bottom edge. December 14th. That was today. Although the room felt warmer a moment ago, the air around me thinned. My breath came shallow, fogging the glass of the frame. Quietly, I checked the next photo. The man had turned slightly. His face was visible now, pale and tired, eyes lowered like he was listening to something inside the walls. I recognized him. Not from memory exactly, from mirrors, from passing reflections that lingered too long. Because I didn't trust my hands, I set the photos back inside the drawer and closed it. The click echoed louder than it should have. Behind me, the lights flickered. Slowly, I turned. Nothing had changed. The shelves stood silent. The heaters hummed. The snow fell. Still, my heart refused to slow. Against the far wall, the security monitor blinked, its screen divided into quiet squares. I hadn't checked it in a few minutes. Quietly, I walked over. The porch camera feed showed the same narrow house from the photos. Snow drifted across the steps, wind carving soft lines along the rail. The porch was empty, although relief washed through me it didn't last, because the timestamp on the monitor read December 14th, and the address label beneath the feed matched the one written faintly on the back of the photos. The house was real, and it was close. Slowly, I leaned closer to the screen, and the reflection of the porch window, a shade moved. Not outside, inside. My stomach twisted. Quietly, I stepped back from the monitor, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. The room felt smaller now, the ceiling lower, the walls pressing inward. Because I'd grown up nearby, I knew that street. I passed it on my way to school, on my way to work, never noticing anything strange. The house had always been there. Still, I couldn't remember ever seeing anyone come or go. Although my shift wasn't over, my keys were already in my hand. The metal bit into my palm as I gripped them too tight. Quietly, I shut down the desk light and slipped my coat on. The radio stayed silent at my hip, its weight steady and wrong. Outside, the cold wrapped around me, sharp and clean. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I crossed the empty lot. The drive felt longer than usual. Street after street passed in pale quiet, the town asleep beneath its white cover. No cars, no voices, just a steady sweep of my headlights. Although I tried to turn back twice, my hands wouldn't move on the wheel. The house waited at the end of the street, its porch light off, windows dark, snow piled against the steps, untouched. Quietly, I parked across the road. From this distance, it looked harmless, small, tired. Because I didn't want to be seen, I stayed inside the car, engine idling low. Frost crept along the windshield edges, feathering inward. The porch camera angle from the monitor replayed in my head. Slowly, I opened the door. The cold hit hard, stealing my breath. Snow soaked through my boots as I crossed the street, each step louder than it should have been. At the base of the porch, I stopped. The front door stood closed. The windows reflected only snow and sky. Although my heart pounded, the street remained still. Quietly, I climbed the steps. The porch boards creaked under my weight, old wood complaining in small, tired sounds. The railing felt rough beneath my gloves, splintered and damp. I reached for the door. Before my hand touched the knob, it opened. Just an inch. Warm air slipped out, carrying a smell I couldn't place. Not food, not smoke. Something stale, like fabric kept too long in a closed box. Although I should have stepped back, my feet stayed where they were. From inside, a soft sound drifted out. Breathing. Slow and uneven. The door opened a little wider. In the narrow gap, I saw the edge of a hallway, pale walls lined with framed photos. Faces stared out, their smiles thin and careful. At the far end, the light glowed faintly, casting long shadows across the floor. Quietly, a voice spoke. Not loud, not threatening, just tired. "You came early," it said. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because the cold had settled deep in my bones, I couldn't tell if I was shaking from fear or relief. Slowly, the door opened wider. The man stood just inside, wrapped in a dark coat dusted with melting snow. His hair clung to his forehead, damp and gray at the edges. His eyes met mine. They were softer than I expected. "I was afraid you wouldn't," he said. Behind him, the hallway stretched on, the framed photos watching in quiet rows. Although every instinct told me to run, I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a soft, final sound. The warmth pressed close, heavy and still as the snow continued to fall outside, sealing the porch in white silence. He turned and walked deeper into the house, his steps slow, careful, like he was conserving something precious. Quietly, I followed. Against the narrow hallway walls, the framed photos seemed closer now, their glass catching the low light as we passed. Although I tried not to look too long, my eyes kept drifting toward them. Faces repeated. The same room, the same chair, the same man, seated in different years, always slightly out of focus, as if the camera had never quite agreed with him. Quietly, the man ahead of me moved with care, one hand brushing the wall for balance. His shoulders rose and fell with slow effort. Each breath counted. Beneath the soft hum of the house, another sound lived, a deeper one. The low, steady pulse of something running behind the walls, like a distant engine that never shut off. Because my coat was still on, the warmth felt wrong, heavy, pressing. It clung to my skin and made my head feel light. Slowly, we reached the end of the hallway. The room opened wide, larger than the house should have allowed. A living room stretched out, furniture arranged with neat care. The carpet was worn thin in one spot near a single armchair, the fibers pressed flat by years of use. Against the far wall, a small table waited with two cups already set. Steam curled from them. Quietly, he gestured toward the chair. "You can sit," he said. "You've been out in the cold." My legs moved before I agreed. The chair accepted my weight like it had been shaped for me alone. The fabric was warm, too warm. Although my hands trembled, the cup fit into them easily. The tea smelled faintly sweet, familiar in a way I couldn't place. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood near the wall, watching me with that same patient expression, like someone waiting for a clock to finish its cycle. "Do you remember this room?" he asked. Slowly, I shook my head. The lie tasted thin, because pieces of memory floated up without permission. A shadow near a doorway, a voice just out of hearing, the sense of being watched without fear. Quietly, he smiled. "It takes time," he said. "The house helps." Against the ceiling, the light flickered once, then steadied. Although I wanted to ask his name, the question stayed trapped in my chest. Saying it felt dangerous, like naming something that preferred to stay loose. He moved closer, stopping just short of the chair. Up close, his face showed every year the photos had stolen. Fine lines cut deep. His eyes carried a tired kindness that made my throat ache. "I kept them safe," he said, nodding toward the hallway. "All of them, every version." My fingers tightened around the cup. "Why?" I asked. Quietly, he rested his hand on the back of the chair. "Because someone had to stay," he said, "and you were very small." The floor creaked softly beneath his weight. Although my chest felt tight, the room stayed calm. No sharp edges, no rush. "That building," I said, "the cabinet." He nodded once. "The records like to remember," he said. "They don't forget what's watched." Slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. He placed it in my lap. The image showed the porch, snow falling thick and quiet. A figure stood at the bottom step, facing the door. It was me. My stomach dropped, but the room did not react. The house held steady, like it had expected this. Quietly, he spoke. "Every watch needs a watcher," he said, "and every watcher needs relief." Because my hands had gone numb, the photo nearly slipped. I caught it just in time, my fingers brushing the glossy surface. The date printed at the bottom was years from now. "I can't," I said, though the word felt weak. He tilted his head. "You already are," he replied. Against the far wall, another door stood open now, one I hadn't noticed before. A narrow staircase descended into shadow, the air below cool and waiting. Although fear stirred, it felt distant, wrapped in something softer. Familiar. Quietly, he stepped back, giving me space. "I stayed longer than I should have," he said. "The house doesn't like imbalance." My legs moved on their own. Each step toward the staircase felt both heavy and right, like settling into a long-delayed rest. Behind me, the man exhaled, a sound full of release. At the top of the stairs, I paused. The living room looked different now. Smaller, less solid. The photos along the hallway blurred at the edges, their faces fading into light. Quietly, I turned back. He stood taller somehow, his coat already hanging loose on his frame, snow melting away from the fabric. "Will you be all right?" I asked. His smile softened. "I'll go," he said. "That's how it works." The house sighed. Slowly, I descended. The air cooled with each step, the warmth lifting from my skin. The hum behind the walls grew clearer, steady, and deep, like a heart finding its rhythm again. At the bottom, a small room waited, simple and clean. A chair faced the narrow window that looked out onto the porch. Snow continued to fall. Although the chair looked old, it welcomed me easily. The moment I sat, the room settled. the hum smoothing into something almost peaceful. Up above, footsteps moved away. The front door opened, then closed, quietly. The porch came into view through the window. The street lay empty, white and still. A shape crossed the glass. The man stepped out into the snow, his figure already lighter, thinner, as if the air was taking him back piece by piece. He did not look back. Because my breath had slowed, the room felt calm, waiting. Against the window, my reflection stared back, pale and tired, eyes soft in a way I hadn't seen before. The hum steadied. Outside, the snow erased footprints almost as soon as they formed, and in the quiet watch of that small room, I understood that the house would never be empty again, because now it knew my name.